net.
Okay, so I picked up and it was already there.
Yeah. I kind of saw it because I was
Like,
actually
I wasn't really expecting that, which I probably
looking that
like.
way.
It hit the bottom and it must have just picked it up.
Must have been a pout.
Like I probably was. That'd have been sick.
I don't think.
I'd have rubbed it all over you because you missed that smell.
We got some excess.
Got one big fish.
Okay.
Real big fish. Real big fish. Definite net fish. I don't know if this is a bass. I think this might be a real pout. I don't think it's a bass.
It's not head shape no more than my pout. Could be a catfish.
I don't think this is a bass.
Maybe you got him hooked weird.
I don't know what it is.
Might have. No bass. No free walleye.
Oh my gosh, that is a giant walleye. Dang. I don't want to speak too loud. Get that thing in the boat, dude. That is the most. That is unbelievable. Holy balls, dude! What is that?
Oh my gosh!
Oh my goodness!
Look at this fish.
This, folks.
Look how tall that thing is.
Jurassic Park, baby. Woo!
Oh man, get that thing on a scale.
Yes. Have you ever seen a walleye like that? That is incredible. Out of this world. My goodness.
I can't see it all, so you're in charge.
Hold on, buddy.
What are you looking like?
13, 11. Oh my gosh, unbelievable.
13, 11?
Yeah,
Here,
dude.
We're gonna need to get a picture of the
Oh
scale
my
or something
gosh.
here.
All right, let's get her back. Folks,
Release video.
unbelievable.
Josh releasing the 13 plus mega giant walleye back into the depths of Jurassic Park. Look at this fish, folks.
Look at it.
Oh,
Talk about a football. Oh my gosh, we're gonna have to help her for a sec.
oh no.
Oh, we'll help her for a sec here.
Okay, so I was thinking of cutting the video right before Cody said, oh no, and you would have thought that that 13 pounder happily swam back to the bottom. Josh had just caught this big old fat walleye, yippee. Anyways, it didn't. The water was 38 degrees. That fish was huge. We spent a lot of time handling it, more than we probably should have, weighing it, measuring it, gawking over it, etc. It had fought, it was tired. Like I said, the water was cold, its metabolism was slow. Fish have less energy, like just less ability to like shoot down to the bottom. And the big thing was I caught that thing in approximately like probably 40 foot of water. And it was experiencing some amount of barotrauma. Fish, when they change positions in the water column, it's going to affect their swim bladder. They use it to like maintain neutral buoyancy, etc. And it will like effectively acclimate depending on where they're at in the water column. That fish making a 40 foot change in depth, that air bladder had blown up, and it is effectively at that point, it's got this big air pocket. So it's kind of like this fish is wearing a life jacket. And after being exhausted from the fight, and after us exhausting it even more, you know, more than we should have, probably from measuring, weighing, etc., we went to let it go, and it just did not have the energy to overcome that additional air in the air bladder that it wasn't like acclimated for at that level of the water column. So when it went to swim back down, where it would have been just fine, it couldn't, because we had exhausted the fish. It had that extra air in the air bladder, and that fish, when it went to take off, it floated back up to the surface. Now in the end, do I think it died? No, and that's because I think we were ready with some descending devices, which I'll go on to explain later. But I really wanted to point this out. I could have just cut the video short there, pretend like everything was honky-dory fine, but I think this is a very important subject, and there's a lot of misconceptions out there, and I really wanted to touch on this. Do I know everything? No. Do I study fish, like from a fishing standpoint, from a biology standpoint? I literally studied them in college. Not to say we learned a lot about barotrauma, but you know, it's touched on. But I love learning. I've read lots of like journal-related articles on this stuff. I've had a lot of personal experience, and I think there's a lot of, like I said, a lot of misconceptions. On one hand, I think it's a much more prevalent issue than people actually realize. On the other hand, I kind of think it's less of an issue. I'm going to go on to explain here. The biggest thing is this. I think the effects of barotrauma are commonly seen much shallower than people think or is commonly understood or, talked about. For example, if you're fishing a smallmouth bass tournament, I've seen it, and oddly enough, it seems to affect bigger, fatter fish more than it does like skinnier fish. You could be catching bass in 15 foot of water. You put them in the live well, those suckers are belly up. Now, in time, I think they do acclimate in that live well and can be fine and recover just fine. But if the effects of that barotrauma are too much, that fish will be sitting there going belly up and having to fight it. So you have this exhausted fish in your live well trying to fight the extra air in its air bladder, kind of like that life jacket that's trying to like flip it upside down. So you have an exhausted fish getting even more exhausted trying to right itself, and it can just kind of like spin out where eventually that fish will die. We're going to go on to some remedies so that doesn't have to happen. But all I'm getting at right here is whether it's pike, muskie, bass, walleye, I think it commonly the effects of barotrauma can be, have an effect on your fishing and your fish at a shallower depth than I think a lot of people talk about. At the same point, I think there's a lot of blanket statements saying that like fish caught over 20 foot of water or 25 foot of water or 30 foot of water. Like I used to commonly hear 30 foot, like they're going to die. So like you should never fish over 30. Like 29 and a half is okay, but like 30 and a half isn't. Like, I mean, that was kind of like the impression I was under almost. Like, that's what you hear. North Dakota Game and Fish, if I can find it, I don't know where, I got it on my phone somewhere. I don't know where I put my phone, but the gist is they have statements saying that you should not keep any fish, or you should not release any fish caught over 25 foot of water. I do not like that statement. Blanket statements like that are not fair to the angler or to the fish. There are some instances where that might be the case, but there's a lot of instances where it's not. What I want to go on to explain here is why I think in some instances it's less of an issue than people give it credit for. Also, what I want to state here, fish can and do die from barotrauma related things, and ultimately we do need to be responsible. With knowledge comes responsibility. It is not responsible to just be killing fish, not utilizing them, etc. I also want to state, like, sometimes big fish die. As fishermen, we put hooks in their mouths, etc. Every once in a while, fish are going to die, no matter how good of a job you do trying to take care of, your fish. It hurts, but it's going to happen every once in a while. That being said, there's also delayed mortality. Every once in a while, we're killing fish we don't even realize we're killing. It's part of the game. We love the resource. We try to take care of it. There is going to be some mortality that we cannot prevent. That being said, we shouldn't be like causing excessive mortality or excessive like waste of the resource. So it is important to understand and that there are different situations that apply in different scenarios with different fish. So one thing I wanted to say, like, why I think it's less of an issue, and here's like a random barotrauma article that North Dakota Game and Fish has. I don't agree with a lot of their statements that they make on it. But so let's just say they say everything you catch over 25 foot of water you should plan on keeping. Okay, so I think in a lot of instances, small walleye, a lot of like smaller fish that might be more prone to like eating bugs, where they're not necessarily chasing down big bait fish at like high rates of speed. Like let's just say young walleye that are eating a lot of small minnows, mayflies, bloodworms, etc. Perch, crappie, things like that. I think they are not used to making massive, fast changes in the water column. That, or I think just some of those younger fish, I think they might be less developed. I think similarly to like humans, you could have children, if you've heard of like RSV, it could be deadly in like young toddlers because their lungs aren't as developed. If they get the sickness of RSV, it can be very dangerous to them. If an adult gets RSV, it's just kind of like the common cold, not that big of a deal. You go on, it's all good. I think similarly, let's just say 12-inch walleye. You start catching a bunch of those out of 25 foot of water, a lot of them are going to be like stomachs hanging out of their mouth because that air bladder will blow up so big it'll push the stomach right out. I think there's probably a lot of like, organ damage, etc. Is it wise and responsible to like be trying to release those fish? And it really probably isn't. You shouldn't be, exploiting that, unless you're just going to keep your limit and then call it good. But that being said, you are limiting a lot of fishing opportunities by just saying you can't like release fish over 25 foot of water. I think that's stupid. And I'm going to go on and explain why. Now, I don't have scientific studies of all this, but I'm going to go on and explain some examples. Especially nowadays with, like, let's just say live scope, forward-facing sonar, there's not as much, there's some situations where you're not just guessing what's going on, you're observing what's going on. You can be on schools of walleye, and let's just say 30 foot of water that are near the bottom, suspend a little off the bottom. You could have a school of Cisco go over their heads at Fort Peck, and those things can occasionally come unglued, and they will chase those things down and like just like fire in their eyes, like just go in for the kill. Big walleyes, I mean, man, you start getting big walleyes out there, dude, those things are incredible predators. Like on Fort Peck, dude, those things have like broom tails. They are so powerful and so fast, and will chase down those Cisco so hard. And I think some people think like, oh yeah, walleye, they just pin things up against break lines or the bottom. Sometimes they chase those things all the way to the surface and break the surface of the water. Like you think they're a bass, but they're a walleye. They will chase down foot-long Cisco utilizing the whole water column, and that is common. So if these fish couldn't sustain changes of 20 to 30 foot or greater in the water column, they would be committing suicide like to eat. They do those things on a daily basis to live. They chase down big bait. That is a common thing. I do not think in most instances it is a harmful thing to bring a walleye up from deeper depths, say 20, 30, probably even 40 plus foot of water. There is a point where I think you are going to start having substantial enough barotrauma issues that it will be deadly to the fish potentially. But I think it's pretty deep. Like, I'm not saying I can't put a number to it, but like I don't want to put a number to it, but I think it's a lot deeper than 20 or 30 foot. I'll say that for sure. I think 20, 30, 40 foot are common for walleye to make like vertical changes in the water column that utilize like the entire water column. That being said, let's just say a walleye or a smallmouth or a pike chases like just freaking out over a school of Cisco, utilizing that whole water column going up and down. They chase that prey. Let's just say they pin it up near the surface of the water in 35 foot of water. They usually, sometimes they do, but they usually don't just sit there. They usually get it and like probably, you know, bring it on back down to the bottom where their swim bladder is like acclimated for. So they're not staying up there. The difference is us as anglers, we're fighting them up from that depth. They're getting tired. We're wearing them out so they have less energy. So they didn't just grab that bait fish and whip right back to the bottom. They're fairly exhausted. And then we go to release them and they have that extra air in their air bladder. If you don't take excessive time as an angler to like, if you're not handling them excessively, if you're not dropping them on their head, etc., if you release them fairly quick, in my opinion, most of the time with those larger fish, it's literally a non-issue. They're used to doing that on the daily. You know, maybe not getting hooked, but making those vertical changes throughout the water column. I do not think it's a big deal. In those 20, 30, 40 foot depths, you know, I think eventually it's going to be an issue. I can't put a number to it. I've caught fish pretty deep at times. You know, but I'll say this. I've seen it on live scope. I've seen it where like, you know, like people be like ice fishing, like, oh yeah, work the fish up. Well, in open water, I haven't seen this as much with the ice, but in open water, I've had walleye that'll chase all the way up and eat under the trolling motor. Smallmouth bass, I do it all the time. I mean, but even walleye, like you could be out in 30, 35, 40 foot of water, and dude, those things just get vicious at times. And if they're really turned on, they'll chase all over the place. Like they are not afraid of using that entire water column. They're not being suicidal. That's just how they feed, you know? So I think it's very unfair to kind of put a blanket statement that you like should not fish for those fish in those depths. That being said, like I said, they made that quick vertical change. There's going to be extra air in the air bladder. They're exhausted. If you handle them excessively, they might struggle to get back down. So I think you need to be extra aware to like be efficient with your time, keep that fish wet, release them in a proper amount of time. Shouldn't be an issue. If it is, and you are trying to release a fish, like I said, there's nothing wrong with occasionally keeping a big fish. That being said, if you're trying to like release that fish, I've been in some situations where I was a little taken back but not sure what to do. There are some really easy methods that I think are effective at returning that fish back to the depth it was caught from, to safely release that fish. Because like I said, if you can imagine, a lot of those larger fish are used to making those vertical changes, but they're not necessarily staying up there for a long period of time. They're not necessarily exhausted. We're exhausting the fish. If you minimize that, usually not a big deal. If you take it too far, then something that I did with that 13-pound walleye, is I use this. So this I keep around as a plug knocker. Okay. So I got this little ice fishing rod and this that I use as a plug knocker. And usually I'll slide this thing down the line to like free up treble hook baits, stuff like that are snagged up in rock piles. But what you can do, if you have a fish that was caught in deep water, you know, I think a lot of times, I can't tell you how many times, like people I think are sincerely really good anglers, because I've run into this situation myself. Like, you get a giant fish, you spend some extra time on it, just like this one, and it's like, oh no, like I can't believe it's not swimming back to the bottom, and like they feel terrible. Not every situation. Sometimes there's other situations. The fish could be bleeding out. Who knows? Maybe the thing had a heart attack. You know, there could be a lot of situations going on. But I think way, way more than people give it credit for. I'm talking as shallow as 12 or 15 or 20 foot of water. Fish are suffering an amount of barotrauma. And with that exhaustion, it's hard for them to swim back to a spot where they're neutrally buoyant. So I'll take this plug knocker right here. And what I have here is just some tieable wire that, you know, I could use for like a pike leader. I just make a loop. And this is just like a gator clip, like you could use for like an electrical connection. What I'll do, I'll take this, and this is what I have in my boat. If I have a fish that's having an issue, this is ready to go, so that's not a prolonged situation. I'll take this, I'll just loop it right through like this, put the gator clip through, okay, and then with this, I can take this clip it right to the anal fin very loosely, and then slowly lower the fish down to the depth that it was caught from here. What I'll do is I'll lower it down there and I'll just like put it in a rod holder, and you can just sit there for like 5 minutes. Let that fish catch its breath in an area where it's neutrally buoyant, where it's not stressed out. And more often than not, and you can watch this on your electronics, especially with like live scope and stuff nowadays, that fish will actually kick off on its own, just like rip off the clip on its own and be absolutely fine, I think, in the majority of the situations. Is there occasionally delayed mortality that could come from that? There could be, but there could be delayed mortality from a lot of different things. I think if you're trying to, you know, if you handle that fish a little excessively, if you're trying to do your best to release a big fish, I think that is a very wise thing to have in your boat as an option for releasing the fish. Additionally, something that I keep on me is a needle for fizzing. Bear in mind, this situation here and a needle for fizzing is something that I almost never do, because I almost never have to, because those fish usually just kick back to the bottom, no problem. I'm talking like extremely rare situations do I ever have to go to these measures. But it's usually some giant fish, and for me personally, I really care about trying to release those fish. And if that's the case, not saying it's always 100% foolproof, but I think having some of these tools available and ready to go are good options to have. Just loop on this little clip, slowly lower the fish down. So if you caught that walleye like I caught, that 13 pounder in 40 foot of water, what we did was we put that clip on it, lowered it down there, gave it some time till it had enough energy, and if it doesn't kick off on its own, you can just give it like a little snap. You just barely have it attached to the anal fin, just barely. It'll rip off, and like I said, I would bet in many situations, you will have saved a fish that many people have been like, oh, this thing can't swim back to the bottom, I don't know what's happening, it's gonna die, like, and you feel bad about it. But I think with a little bit of education, like, and experience, like I didn't know about this stuff, you know, not that many years ago. I think you can save some fish that could have died otherwise. Additionally, like if you're fishing tournaments, if you're fishing deeper water, I think I can't stress enough how important something as simple as a fin clip can go a long ways. There's a couple different styles. This one's got a bead chain. This one's got a gator clip. I do not think catching fish out of deeper water in a tournament is a bad thing, but I think you need to be prepared that those fish are not acclimated with their swim bladder for the surface of the water, which is like what your live well is. You know, they might be acclimated for 40 foot, for 20 foot, for 15 foot. So in some of those instances, they're going to want to go belly up, and if they're exhausting themselves in your live well, they could eventually die. If you take a fin clip, very simple, clip it to their anal fin, all it does is add some extra weight to right that fish upright so it doesn't exhaust itself in your live well and die. When it doesn't have to keep trying to right itself, it can catch its breath, you know, if you want to kind of call it that, and recover. And in time, you know, after it's been in there for 30 minutes or an hour, you can actually take the clips off, and they're actually like, they don't even really need them anymore after that. It's like they acclimate after a while in the live well if you don't exhaust them. So anyways, I can't stress enough how much these fin clips help if you are fishing tournaments in slightly deeper water. Usually I'll use one on the anal fin, and if they're still kind of like looking tipsy, I'll put another 2, like one on each pec fin, you know, up by their chest. So I got notes on this. There's so much I want to talk about with this. Just kind of checking my notes here real quick. So, I think I mentioned a little bit about fizzing. Like I said, I usually carry 2 fizzing needles on me. I almost never fizz. There's a few unique situations where that's come about. I think a descending device is a little less intrusive, a little bit more straightforward for most people to use. Gets the job done, very easy to use. I do keep a couple fizzing needles on me. There's been a lot of studies on fish that have been caught in tournaments, fizzed, released. They've tracked these fish for months to try to see, like, are these fish negatively affected by this? What I'm going to say is this. There is some amount of delayed mortality, but there's a lot of fish that live. And, like, a lot of these fish are caught in really deep water. This has been documented. They've been fizzed. They've been released. They're clearly living. Is it having a negative effect on them? I think there's a lot of variables, you know, I think they were trying to, like, decide, like, hey, do their movements change? Do they go back where they, you know, were originally caught? Things like that. Clearly, many of these fish are living, so fish do not automatically die if they're caught in deep water. Fizzing does not necessarily kill your fish if you do it, you know, right. I mean, it can be a good remedy to remove the gases from the air bladder to help, you know, keep that fish alive. Like I said, in most instances, I think fin weights, if you're fishing a tournament, or a descending device, is about all you're going to need, you know, in the majority of situations. One thing I want to bring up that I think is another misconception is that lake trout do not have issues with barotrauma. Like, I think people are like, oh yeah, like, you're going to kill crappie, you're going to kill walleye, you're going to kill bass, but lake trout are fine. Lake trout are not immune from it either. They burp up their gases. Like, they can burp up their gases actively, where other fish, it takes more time to acclimate their swim bladder. But that being said, I can't tell you how many times, like, on Fort Peck, you kind of see some goofy things with lake trout. You know, and they are absolutely affected by barotrauma. I think it is wise, you know, especially if you're fishing lakers in like 130 foot of water. And I don't know if I've always done the best with this, but I'm going to try to be a little bit more mindful of it. Is to, like, if you got heavy tackle, you can horse them in pretty quick. I think if you're fishing that 130 foot of water, it's best to kind of let them fight out a little bit. You know, kind of like, don't just horse them all the way in right away. Give them a chance to burp that air out. And I think it's going to kind of help the situation. Once again, I think if you bring them up fairly quick and you release them fairly quick, it's not much of an issue. But it can turn into an issue, especially if you're handling them a little too much, etc. And I think just as a general rule, I think if you give them a little kind of breather, to like a little chance to burp while they're fighting without horsing them in the whole way, I think it kind of helps a little bit. I've been told, and you read that, like, you know, and this could go for bass or walleye, stuff like that, if you fight fish slower, I've heard that you can't hardly fight a fish slow enough to, like, really help them acclimate their swim bladder. What I'll say is this: I don't think it's going to hurt to fight them a little slower. I think it might be a little less dramatic of an effect. That being said, they still are going to experience some amount of barotrauma because it still is quick enough. But like I said, these fish do this every single day chasing down bait fish. They cover the entire water column as large predator fish. That's just what they do. Like, fish do not die automatically if they're caught over 25 foot of water. It's very dependent on the situation. Could 10-inch crappie die every time out of 25 foot of water? They very well could. Do 20-inch walleye? I'd say rarely, if ever. You know, anyways. But where's it going with this? Yeah, with lake trout. One thing that's interesting that I've experienced with a few big lakers where we've handled them excessively, caught out of 130 foot of water, if you try a descending device like this thing is, like, pretty heavy. If you got a big laker, it may not, like, that thing is like a balloon. Like, you cannot believe it. And that's, like I was going to say, like, a lot of people, I think lake trout are immune from barotrauma issues. They're absolutely not. Like I said, they can burp it out, but it doesn't mean that they've equalized. It's very interesting, too, even as you release lake trout. Some want to go belly up. Others think like a rock. Especially when you're fishing like 130 foot of water, it's very important to release your fish reasonably quick, but to hold them and kind of let them, because, like, sometimes they'll sink like a rock. And I'm going to be honest, like, they might sink like a rock, and they're not even really like have their equilibrium yet. So they might sink too fast because they're, you know, they burped out too much air. Where others have too much air and they can't swim back down. So it is actually, I think, very important with lake trout to like know that like it is affecting them, especially out of like really deep depths as well. Give them a chance, hold them, make sure they're upright, make sure they're swimming on their own. I think that's very important with any of these fish. Make sure they have control of themselves. And if they cannot get back to an appropriate depth where they're neutrally buoyant, where they can recover, you need to help them get there. It shouldn't happen much if you're quick about releasing the fish, but if it does happen, descending devices absolutely can work. Also, fizzing is an option if your descending device doesn't work or whatever. With lake trout, what I found is you would need so much weight if they're having issues that it's crazy. So I have fizzed lake trout to release them on a few occasions. Now I'm talking, like I said, caught out of more than 130 foot of water. Which is funny because some of those fish caught out of 130 foot of water will sink like a rock if you let them go. Others go belly up because there's too much air because like they didn't burp it out right. Like they don't always get their ratios of burping quite right. So, like I said, fizzing is something that I've done, especially on a few lake trout, because like the amount of air in a big lake trout is insane. You have to let out a lot of air, and I think I've successfully released a few lake trout that would have died otherwise if I hadn't done that. Is it the end of the world if you're into that situation? You keep a few lake trout? No, but if you're doing it consistently, I think it's good to be aware, good to be educated, and to try to take care of the resource. And in some instance, like I said, I mean, it's very, very rare that I'll have to actually fizz a lake trout, but like if I do it once or twice a year and it saves those one or two fish and I wanted to release them, you know, I feel good about that effort. You know, you fizz it, you hold the fish there, you let them swim under their own power. I don't just like let them drop like an anchor. I make sure that fish is kicking hard to the bottom so that I can kick down, but like I've given it the ability to like get that life jacket off. I've bled off the air with the fizzing needle. And if you want to look up how to fizz, I'm not going to demonstrate that in the video. I was going to actually grab my needle. The needle that I have is a Ben's Mender. There's quite a few options online. It's honestly not that hard to do once you've done it a few times. If you got a few medium-sized fish you're going to eat for dinner, you can just practice on them for fun. Anyways, whether it's walleye, whatever. But yeah, anyways, that's a few things I keep on me. You know, one of the important things that I've heard when it comes to fizzing is actually the most dangerous part about it is passing on germs. So it actually doesn't hurt if you have like a lighter or something to, whatever, clean up the needle. Because that's the biggest thing is like if you got dried blood and whatnot on your needles, you're passing dirty needles, which could actually be more harmful to the fish than actually just puncturing the air bladder. That will heal. They will be fine in terms of that. It's more the possibility of spreading disease, infection, things like that. So anyways, hope I got you guys thinking a little bit. Like I said, barotrauma is a real issue. It kills some fish. A blanket statement I do not think is fair to put on the situation. I've heard numerous times like of people that I will not say that they will not fish deeper than 25 foot of water because you're killing all the fish. That is not fair to say. Then again, in some instances you could be. So like I said, it's very important to be educated and aware. There's a lot of different scenarios. I think it's important to be like a good steward of the resource. Like I said, there's just a lot that, I've seen, experienced, heard, and I think a lot of misunderstandings. I don't know it all, but I appreciate you guys listening. This is a long video. I just think it's a very important subject and some stuff that I wanted to like share. You ask me in a year or two, I might have some more to add to this, but my thoughts might change. I could be wrong on a few things. But anyways, appreciate you guys listening. I just want to take the time to not gloss over the fact that this walleye did not just swim right back to the bottom. We had to use a descending device on it like this. Do I believe that it lived? Yes. Do I believe it could have died? There's a chance. I think we gave it a much better chance of living than if we just tried to hold it there for an hour without using a descending device. It would have just become more and more and more and more exhausted. It would have died. That descending device gave it the ability to get down, be neutrally buoyant, recover, and probably go on to become even bigger. So, thank you guys. Have a great day.